So many ulama will start the life of the Prophet ﷺ at different places, and we chose last week to deal with a hadith that talks about the Prophet, his characters, what he looked like, and how he ﷺ, how he dealt with his time and with his family at home, how he was when he left, and how his gatherings ﷺ, how his gatherings were. And we dealt with that last week, alhamdulillah. So this week we're going to actually start now having ourselves equipped with a little bit of knowledge about our Prophet. Now we're going to start the actual Seera. And we find that the house of God, the Kaaba, was the first house of God built by the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. Ibrahim alayhi salam. With his son, who? Ismail. Okay, they built the Kaaba. The Kaaba was the first house of God on earth, and this is a structure that was recognized, and is this recognition amongst the Christians and the Jews of that time. Yes, they would come and they would pay their respects. However, over time, the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala became something that was clouded. The cloud became over it, and people began to worship different idols. And this is something that happened over time. Idols, statues, and they then slowly, over the centuries, began to move away from worshipping one God to worshipping several different idols. To the point that where you had, around about the time of the Prophet's birth, 360 idols around the Kaaba. The very Kaaba now had approximately 360 idols. And the people of Mecca at that time, every single person or every single household would have an idol that they would worship. And they would worship this idol before they left, and when they came back to the houses. So it was like a lucky charm. These idols, and this idol was a center of the household. The idol in everyone's house was a center of the household, in the center. Much like the TV. TV, the center. You know? The center of the household, TV. Back then it was idols. And over centuries, the concept of one God and the oneness of Allah became something that had become forgotten about. With the introduction of so many idols and the introduction of so many statues, they began to forget about that. And certain tribes, Arab tribes, became influenced by other people, other tribal people, and they became. Some tribes were even given statues to introduce. When they would go and trade, they would bring back statues. So when they would trade themselves, the Arabs got and they bring, they go in business and they bring back a statue and introduce that statue. And several statues, several idols became introduced into the Arabian peninsula and into Mecca in particular. Now there was a particular Ma Zamzam. We know the famous story of Ma Zamzam, that this was where Hajar or Hagar, she was running looking for water for her son, and then the water was found by the foot of her son, or you see in different narrations, Sayyidina Jibril hit the ground and water came out. And this water was a water that continued to flow for many centuries. At one point there was a group of people of a certain tribe, and this tribe was called the Jurhumites, and they were from Yemen. And they came to Mecca and they settled, and they caused a lot of problems in Mecca. And the people of Mecca, they tolerated them, but eventually they had to kick them out because they caused so much trouble. And what they did is that before they left, the Ma Zamzam, they blocked it up and buried it, and they put a lot of treasure in there to block it up. And when they were expelled The idea was to come back and dig up that treasure. But people, due to the abundance of other wells, people then forgot the importance of Zamzam. And over the centuries, Zamzam became something of a forgotten, something of the past. Because it wasn't the only well that they had. Just, okay, one well's disappeared and okay, never mind. But we have many, many other wells. So its importance disappeared. Now, one day, Abdul Muttalib, he was a very important man. He is the grandfather of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abdul Muttalib was a man who was a very powerful man. He came from a very influential tribe. And he, one day, was sleeping by the Kaaba. They say that you have the Kaaba and you have a semicircle wall. You have the Kaaba. If you look at the pictures, there's a semicircle, like a wall, like a half a circle. You have the Kaaba there, for example. This is the Kaaba, for example. Then you have a semicircle wall next to it. He was sleeping in that semicircle one night, and he'd like to sleep there. He's a very pious man. And one night, he had a dream in which somebody came to him and said, "Dig." And he asked the person in the dream, "Dig for what? Dig where?" And the person went away. He woke up, and subhanAllah, he said to himself, he wanted to know exactly, because the dream was very powerful. So he decided the next night to go back and sleep in the same place with the hope that he might have the same dream and the hope that he may be able to find the answer to the question. So once he's looking for part 2 of a dream, which is very difficult. Most people when they dream once and you want to go back to bed to finish your dream off, it's gone. I think most people find that very difficult. But he was very determined. So he went back the second night. And he slept in the same place. And he had the same dream, subhanAllah. And the person told him, "Dig." And he said, "Dig for what? Dig where?" No answer. And he woke up. So he decided to come back for the third night. Abdul Muttalib decided to come. So he came back the third night. And he had the same dream, mashallah. And the third night, 3 dreams, the same thing. Dig. He goes, "Dig for what? Dig where?" Went away. He came back on the 4th night. Had the same dream. MashaAllah. 4 dreams, the same thing. Part 1, part 2, part 3, and part 4. MashaAllah. And he then he asked, "Dig for what?" And this person said, "Dig for Zamzam." Dig for Zamzam. And this time he said, "What is Zamzam?" And then in the dream, the person who came to him for several nights began to tell him, "Dig for Zamzam, you will not regret it. She is your inheritance and from your greatest ancestor." Ismail Ibrahim. "And she will never ever go dry, nor will she fail. And it's a gift to give to all the Hujjaj, the people who come to Hajj." And then the speaker gave him 4 specific signs. He told him about Zamzam, and he told him where. And he said that you will go to a place where there's blood, and there's some feces of animal, dung. And there's a ant's nest, and there are a certain type of bird, ravens, these black birds. So in that area, that's where you're going to find it. So now he wakes up. So now he's been told to dig. Dig for what? For Zamzam. And don't forget, Zamzam was something that they forgot about. It was very important. It was a gift from Allah Azza wa Jal. And not surprising, but mashallah, wisdom that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided for the well to be dug up now. It's like getting back to their roots. Because why? You could say, why didn't Allah reveal it centuries ago. Why now? These are precursors for the coming of a prophet. So then Abdul Muttalib he goes around the Kaaba, and yes, despite the idols there, they will still do Hajj. The Arabs and people will still do Hajj. Granted, it'd be very different to the Hajj that we do now, but certain things that they did, we still do today in our Hajj. And he went round the Kaaba, thinking about this dream. And as he goes round, he hears, out of his corner of his eyes, he sees these birds flying, and they go to a particular area. And this area is where they, in between two idols, were opposite the door of the Kaaba. And he realizes that these birds have gone there, and in that area where they land, there's blood. And he says, coincidence. It's not a coincidence. Those birds like to go to areas where there's blood. The ravens, like areas where there's blood. Like before a battle, what do you find these birds flying around? Why? Because for them, it's dinner time. There's gonna be some people in the battle, blood and so forth. They want to eat these vultures. Above, subhanallah. So, and he looks and he says, yeah, no big deal. Those ravens, they're attracted to blood, and that area is where there's a sacrifice, where they sacrifice things to their gods. So there's bound to be blood. However, he looks closely, and he begins to find that there's dung, animal feces. And he finds what? The ant's nest. So this can't be a coincidence. The birds going there, okay, that's something normal. They're attracted to blood. You expect that. But for the ant's nest to be there, and the leftover and the feces, the dung of an animal to be there, and he realized, okay, that's the 4 signs that he was given in his dream, and he realized that's where to dig. So what he does, he goes home, and he then gets his pickaxe, and he then goes and he brings his son to help him, and they begin to dig, and they start digging and digging, and then people began to come out, because it's quite early in the morning, yeah? And people began to come out, and people began to get upset. Because you have to understand, yeah? Just to put you in the right frame of mind. Imagine you go to a mosque, and after Fajr, there's a man there with his son. They pulled the carpet up, and they're digging in the mosque. You're going to say, this guy's crazy. And he's digging, and this is a man who's well known in the community. Somebody who's a leader, and he's digging. He's got a pickaxe, and he's digging a hole in the mosque. What's going on here? Now that's a mosque. Imagine the Kaaba, the area of the Kaaba. It's a very sacred place. But he's a man with a mission. He's determined, and he digs. And people now began to get upset, because this is something. This is dishonoring, and this is something of a sacrilege, as they say. And he tells his son to stand his place and just to guard him. And he keeps digging and digging. And people get upset. And some people began to leave. Then what happens that as he's digging, and his son's standing, protecting him, he hits a rock. You dig, soft, and then all of a sudden you hit a rock. Then when he hit the rock, people began to become interested. It's because to see what's going on. And he removed that, and then he pulled out all this treasure. So now people are like, oh, he's found all this treasure. So more people now crowding, not because he's done something dishonorable, because there's treasure now. They want some. So he digs it all out, and the Ma Zamzam, which is more important than the treasure, that comes out. So this ancient well that you forgot all about is found. And then this treasure, he takes this treasure and he then distributes it. He then distributes it equally. and his tribe, Bani Hashim, Abdul Muttalib's tribe, Bani Hashim, was given the responsibility of looking after the Ma Zamzam and distributing the Ma Zamzam to the people of Hajj. So that's his responsibility. It was given back to him. So now there's a revival of the old, ancient ways of the previous prophets. Ma Zamzam's come back. And this is like I said, this is a preparation for prophecy. Now, despite him, alhamdulillah, being very happy now, Abdul Muttalib, with this newfound treasure and the fact that he was given the responsibility of this ancient well, that's a miracle. This well never ever stops. To this day, it's still gone. This well, subhanAllah. The source, wallah alam. This well. You imagine, subhanAllah, a well, wells dry up. Here in England and Wales, what happens? You have a few weeks, no rain, very hot weather, and they have a hose pipe ban. No, you're not allowed to use hose pipes with water, wasting water. There's a drought. Last summer, there had a big scare, a drought. If you watch the news, there was a drought. MashaAllah, Allah sent 3 months of rain in the summer. The summer was raining all the time, MashaAllah. All the time, rain, alhamdulillah. But a few months before, there were complaints, drought. They had these pictures of these lakes dry. MashaAllah, subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Ma Zamzam has never, apart from that time when they blocked it, I don't know the other 2 times. Otherwise, it's been flowing. When it's allowed to flow naturally without being blocked, it will flow. Now, just to give you an understanding, we're talking about a desert. We're in a desert, and we're not talking about hundreds of people drinking for thousands and thousands of years. It never stopped. That's a miracle, of course. In a desert, give me one well that's gone for thousands of years and hasn't dried up. Yes, people have blocked it, but where it's naturally dried up, plenty. Where it's dried up, but where it has not dried up naturally, you won't find that. It's a miracle. Now, Abdul Muttalib, although he's very happy now, and his family are now in charge of Zamzam in terms of distributing and giving it to the pilgrimages, he became aware of something that had not troubled him for a while, or did not really had not come to his attention fully, the importance of it. And that was the fact that while he was digging, he only had one son to protect him. He had many daughters, but at this moment in time, only had one son. And what he realized is that unlike other tribes, other family members, who had several sons to protect, he thought about it. He goes, if that was somebody else from another tribe, they would, if their sons came out to help, they'd have enough sons to completely form a circle around. He and some had a few sons, but he only had one son. This played on him because he realized that his weakness amongst other Arabs. Well, he was very powerful in many other ways, but the sons is where that's where your preservation and continuation continues amongst the sons, amongst the Arabs, the pagan Jahili Arabs. And he then makes a prayer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and don't forget he worshipped one God. He was a person who, Abdul Muttalib, worshipped one God. Abdul Muttalib, yeah? He wasn't a Jew or Christian. But he believed in one God. So, and he asked Allah, he said, if Allah can give me Zamzam, then Allah Azza wa Jal, and Allah can give me his treasure, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can also provide me with boys, several boys. And he then, he makes a prayer and he makes a vow. And he asks, he goes, "Oh Allah, if you give me 10 boys, I'll sacrifice one of them. I will kill one of them as a sacrifice." And this is something that they used to do back then. And he kept that vow in the back of his mind. Now he's not really thinking that Allah, because he's had all women, he's had girls, one boy. And he's like thinking, if I get 10, one of them I'll. He's probably thinking he'll get 4 or 5, or 6, for example. So he's just like it's a statement that's off the cuff, as I say. Off the cuff. If I get 10, one of them I'll sacrifice. He's not really. Never in his wildest dreams is he going to think that you're going to have 10. Otherwise he wouldn't say that, obviously. But subhanAllah, Allah Azza wa Jal provided him with 10. And his vow was that when they all reached the age of puberty, he would sacrifice one of them as a token of gratitude to God. And his last son, the 10th one, was called Abdullah. Abdul Muttalib's son, the last one, the 10th one, was called Abdullah. Now, okay, he then allows all of them to grow up to manhood, and he keeps his vow. The Arabs, despite their jahiliyyah, despite their ignorance, were people of the word, particularly when it comes to vows. A vow. How do you say vow in language? Okay. Like when you say wallah, wallahi, I swear by Allah. He made a similar type of oath. Now he could have just said, forget about that, but he didn't. A vow is a vow. He kept his promise. He kept his promise. Despite what it meant. Because what it would mean is that one of his sons would have to be sacrificed. But nonetheless, that's what his vow, that's what he promised Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's what he has to stick with. So then, he was somebody who has a man of his word and a man of deep responsibility. And he wanted and he needed to keep his pact with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what he did, he then gathered all his sons and he told them what was going to happen. And they agreed. Now you imagine, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, mashallah, exactly. You imagine, let's say, mashallah, it's 10, if I say to you, well, a long time ago, mashallah, I made a vow that I was going to slaughter one of you. Inshallah, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because I didn't have any sons. And mashallah, Allah's given me all of you sons now, alhamdulillah. So, what we're going to do is this, and this is what he did. And all the sons agreed. He said, we're going to put each of your names, and we're going to draw out the person his name comes out. Whichever son his name comes out, that's the one that I'm going to slaughter. They all agreed. They all agreed. SubhanAllah. Nobody said anything so far. So they put all the names in. And Abdullah was the last son and the most beloved. Most beloved to Abdul Muttalib. So whose name comes out? Abdullah. Abdullah's name comes out. And he's standing there, Abdul Muttalib standing with a knife. And when his name comes out, he's a bit upset. He's upset. Nonetheless, he keeps his promise. So he takes the son by his hand and takes him to sacrifice him. A vow is a vow. Never in his wildest dreams would he think he'd have 10 sons. Never in his wildest dreams would he think he'd have to do that. It was something. It was an exaggerated vow, as they say. But nonetheless, it happened. So he then takes him by the hand. And obviously, the rest of the sons, although they're quietly but not happy. Now the women, in particular the mother of Abdullah, the mother, because others had different mothers, she did not want her son to be sacrificed. And then the women start working behind the scenes. And then the women then speak to the men of the tribe. I think, do something about this. Do something about this. And what the relatives then, when they saw him coming with a knife, holding his son's hand, they said, "Where are you going?" And he explained, "I've made a vow. The vow was to sacrifice one of my sons out of the 10, and his name's come out." And obviously they knew what was going on there. And he said, "Well, instead of killing him, how about that you give a sacrifice, that you sacrifice animals instead of him? And we will pay, because we're relatives, we will pay, for this. But don't kill him." So he's thinking, is this possible? Will God accept this? SubhanAllah, see? He's not just jumping. He's saying, it sounds like a good idea, but is it something that is a accepted practice? Is it acceptable? And they tell him that there's a Jewish rabbi who lives in Yathrib, which is Medina. Go and ask him. And actually, it was SubhanAllah, it was a woman. It was a woman, not a man, a woman, a wise woman. So he goes there. He goes and he takes his son, and he goes to make sure is this right or wrong. And he makes to a place, and he finds that the woman isn't there. She's gone to another place, Khaybar, which we'll find out later. So he goes there and he finds her, and he tells her what's happened, and he asks her, "Can a sacrifice of animals be given instead of the sacrifice of my son? Can I offer a sacrifice of animals, as a ransom for him?" And she said, "Come back tomorrow. I'll think about it." It's a woman, yes? And he comes back the next day. And he then asks her. And she gives him an idea. Says, "This is what you do. You draw out the names. Put his name in, and put 10 camels down. And take his name, and then draw out the name again. So he's got the boy there and 10 camels. And she said, draw out a lot. Put the animals' names, and the boy. And then pick again who comes out. If the boy's name gets picked out again, add another 10 camels. And then pick again. If the boy's name comes out, add another 10 camels. And then pick again. And keep on doing that. If his name keeps on coming back, add 10 camels. And then pick again. Until the boy's name, until the camels come out. When the camel's name comes out, stop. That's a sign that it's been accepted by God. So he then goes and he does that. And he then puts his boy down and 10 camels down. And then he draws to see whose name is going to come out. Does it again. Whose name? Abdullah. 10 camels. He picks again. Whose name? Abdullah again. That's 20 camels. Does it again. Abdullah. 30 camels now. Does it again. Picks Abdullah again. 40 camels. He keeps on doing it. 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 camels. And he picks again. this time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had decreed that the name of Abdullah comes out. After the name of the camels come out. The name of the camels. So when the name of the camels come out, there's relief. It's finally accepted. In other words, 100 camels have been accepted in place of his life. Abdul Muttalib, despite this, now most people are like, alhamdulillah, finished. Khalas, we're now out. Run away. He wanted to make sure. He said, let's do it again to make sure. I don't want it to be a coincidence. Just do it again to make sure. So they do it a second time. Name comes out, the camels. He goes, do it again to be certain. And they do it a third time. And once he's certain that, the name of the camels has come out several times, then he's completely at peace that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has accepted this from him. And his son, subhanAllah, his son then goes on to live. And this is the wara', the scrupulousness. He could have just left it. Now, this time that they lived in was a time in which idols, as we mentioned, was a big thing. The oneness of God, worshipping one God, has become something of a memory for some. And for most people, it's been forgotten about. And in the introduction of many, many idols into the Arabian Peninsula was something that happened for many centuries. And despite that, there was still a group of people who were called Hunafa, who believed in one God. But they were a minority. And there were some Christians and some Jews who lived amongst the pagan Arabs. And the Jews and the Christians looked down at the pagan Arabs. They looked down on them as being people, idol worshippers. Look at them, crazy people. They even worship one God. They looked down on them as being people. And there were people who, you would look down on. SubhanAllah, they're worshipping 15 idols, worshipping statues that can't do anything. They're asking statues to help them. Statues. And Umar ibn Khattab used to say, at one point, he'd have a statue made of dates. He'd be worshipping the statue of dates. And then one day he got hungry. He looked around. There's nothing to eat. And he kept on looking. There's nothing to eat. Then he looked at a statue. MashaAllah, nice statue. Juicy dates. And he thought about it. And because he was really hungry, so he ate it. He ate his God. And he said years afterwards, he goes, where were our minds? Where were our minds? What were we thinking? But this is when you become brainwashed. At that, when you're in that mentality, you don't understand. Nobody can really convince you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's like a spell is upon you. A spell is upon you. And when you wake up, you realize. But during that moment in time, you're going to justify that. You'll justify it by any way. Any way you'll justify it. Until you wake up and you come out, then you realize how, just how far, how deluded and how astray you were. But during it, most people can never in the wildest dreams they realize how far they are. We'll stop there, inshallah, and we will continue, inshallah, next week in talking about the events that happened before the birth of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and as well as describing the environment at the time of the Prophet's birth and the environment in Mecca and the Arabian Peninsula at the time. And we're also going to talk about in a lot of detail, inshallah, the great event that was called, that the year became known as. It's called the Year of the Elephant. And what happened during that event that made the year become famous and was named after a particular elephant, Am al-Fil. And the story of the elephant, inshallah ta'ala, we'll talk about next week, inshallah, and lessons that we can be learnt from that, inshallah. And then, inshallah, we will talk about the birth of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the miraculous events that happened before his birth, including the elephant, which happened during the same year of his birth, and we're going to talk about the miracles that happened when when Amina became pregnant, and we're going to also talk about the birth itself and the miraculous things that happened. SubhanAllah, many things happened in Mecca, many things happened outside of Arabia, from far off places. Many things happened, and many things were predicted and prophesied. And his birth, no human being has ever, no human being, Musa, Isa, no one has had a birth as important and as significant than the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Miraculous things happened at the time of his birth, and there's many accounts, many ahadith, subhanAllah, which indicate that if his birth was unlike any other birth in human history, before, during, or after, then this is a man who is unlike any man before or during his time or after. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If his birth was so miraculous, if his birth was so unique, then definitely he's a very unique individual. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This we're going to talk about in a lot of detail, inshallah, in next week's class, inshallah ta'ala. Are there any questions?
About the camel.
The camel.
After the incident of the camel, the fine for someone killed anybody has been changed from 10 camels to 100 camels because of that event of the
Are you telling me or are you asking?
I heard about it.
You heard about it? Ajib. So that became a custom?
Yeah, because of that particular. Before that, it was 10 camels.
Ajib. MashaAllah. The Seera is there's a lot of detail in the Seera. A lot of detail, a lot of amazing things. I think the birth of the Prophet, I'm researching it right now. There's a lot of information. Yeah, and the vast majority of our youth, the vast majority of Muslims don't have a clue just how important an event, and the miraculous things that happened at the time of his birth, both in Mecca and outside and other countries. At the time of his birth, in Abyssinia, in Rome as well. Many things happened. In Persia, things happened at the precise birth of the Prophet. SubhanAllah, things happened that were unaccountable for. People could not account for it until they realized that all these things happened at a particular time, the time of the Prophet's birth. So we'll talk about this shortly. Any other questions?
What book are you using?
I'm using several books, but the one book that I'm using is the book it's called Martin Lings. It's called Muhammad by Martin Lings in English. Very good book. Very good. By Martin Lings. Martin and Lings. Lings.
Is he a Muslim?
Yeah. Yes.
I
put it here. Okay, it comes up backwards.
It's become a mirror.
Okay. Martin. It's a book that's been it's a book that's been done in English, that's been translated from some of the very earliest sources of Seera. One Seera called Ibn Hisham, one of the famous Seeras, very old Seera. He basically summarized. So it's based on one of the earliest, based on some of the earliest sources of some of our Seera literature. As well as I'm using several other books and several other and my own classes that I attended in Yemen with Habib Umar as well. classes that I took from Habib Umar, because we did it over several years, the Seera, inshallah. And I was a translator. I'm a translator because he'd be teaching a group of people every year, from the different parts of the world who spoke English, and I'd be translating. So I'll be using his lectures, as well as other books that he used, as well as this book as well. Well, this book, this is a very good book in English, and I've compared it to the Arabic, some of the old Arabic books that have been written in Seera. It's accurate. Large portions I can see where he's literally translated. So it's very. There's one or two things. There's no book that's perfect, but there are one or two things in there that can be that need to be avoided. But overall, it's one of the best. Certainly one of the best works ever written. There's also a lecture series on YouTube by Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. Excellent. In English, I can see it's probably one of the best, if not the best, on the Seera by Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. It's on YouTube. It's about 24 classes, lectures. Very, very worthwhile listening to, inshallah, if you can download it on YouTube. Any other questions?
Earlier you have told us that Kaaba is the house of Allah, right? And Kaaba has been built by Prophet Ibrahim and Ismail, right? But years by years, the people that live near Kaaba, they place all the idols to be worshipped. But at the same time, they still perform Hajj. So, like, in your opinion, why do you think that they put all the idols around the Kaaba, and at the same time, they still practicing the Hajj?
They were very confused. Very confused and very lost. That's why they were called Jahiliyyah, ignorant. It wasn't something that happened over 100 years. We're talking like hundreds of years. These things were slowly introduced over 100, like hundreds and hundreds of years. These practices that have been introduced slowly. So and ignorance as well. Christianity had largely affected areas surrounding the Arabian Peninsula, areas like Syria, large parts of Europe, Abyssinia. But Arabia had largely been, Christianity had no effect. Just in Allah's wisdom, Allah Azza wa Jal decreed that for it to have not penetrate. So these practices just got stronger and stronger. Plus the introduction of idols and statues. When people would come to visit Mecca, people would come and bring statues with them over the centuries. And the people of Mecca, because they were very, they would honor their guests, they would allow them. Yes, there was shortcomings from themselves that allowed it to happen. So the lax attitude, and this, they were so tolerant that they allowed it all to happen over centuries. So it became. Well, if you do something haram once, it's haram obviously. But if you keep on doing something haram until it becomes something widely accepted, and if that continues for centuries, people are going to forget that it was wrong to start off with, because it's so widespread and so culturally accepted. And plus, there was no guidance. No prophet had been sent to them for a long time. All the prophets were Bani Israel. So all these things contributed.
And one more thing, from my current understanding, I understand that Islam exists during the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So like from the time where Prophet Ibrahim and Ismail, they were like
Hunafa.
The name of the Islam itself is Hanif. So like, is the teaching for the Hanif religion, is it the same as the?
They were Muslim, not in the sense as we understand it today. That they pray 5 times a day, they give 2.5% zakah, they do Hajj in a particular way, they have Ramadan. No. In essence, they worship one God, and in essence, they all had the same message. In terms of Sharia, they were all different. They said that in the time of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, in the Torah, the rules and regulations are very different, a lot more stricter. They say that in the books of fiqh now, they say that during Musa's time, a man could marry as many women as he wanted. During Sayyidina Isa in his time, the law was that you can only marry one. And then when Islam came, 4. In between. So that's the laws of laws were different. So they were Muslim in the sense that worshipping one God, but not in terms of the particular aspects of the Sharia. Like Ramadan is something specific to the Ummah of the Prophet. 5 prayers in 4 2 rak'at, 4 3 and 2. That's 4. That's something specific only to the Ummah of the Prophet. So in terms of the essence of all the messages, are all the same. In terms of the practical application, they were different. Does that answer your question? Any questions from the back? Nothing? In that case, inshallah, we'll end there, inshallah, and we'll continue next week. 7:30, we'll start next week, because the Isha now is pulling back. So we'll start 7:30, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
Ya. Berarti lu.
Have you stopped this?